This is video number 1 in what I hope will become a weekly blog and sort of update, mostly just for myself, on my language learning progress. I'm calling it C210, C210, because the final goal, however many years into the future I will ever actually reach it, if it's possible even, is to be at a C2 level, which according to the European framework means fluent or very proficient in 10 languages. In my case, at the very least, these 10 languages include my own native language, so it gives me one for free, which is English, as well as German, Dutch, Swedish, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, and Mandarin Chinese. And obviously the difficulty of achieving such a level in 10 languages depends on what those languages are, how diverse they are, and so on. Switching out Dutch for Japanese or Arabic would certainly make that quite a bit harder. And I'm motivated to do this partly because it, certainly by presenting myself in a video to whoever might possibly see this, does provide me some motivation to continue working towards it. But also because I've come across this question so many times, which is how many languages can one speak? And a major issue with giving a number to that is that we don't have any strict definition of what it means to speak a language. We know that there are very many people who are able to speak a very large, far more than 10, think 20, 30, whatever, 40 languages at a very basic level, where they can essentially recite certain phrases, or maybe they've learned the first 500, maybe 1,000 words of a language, which allows them to communicate at a basic level. You know, you're in a bar, you meet someone from Romania, you know 500 words of Romanian, so you spit out a couple of sentences and hope that they answer you nicely and slowly. And that level of definition of knowing a language is sort of difficult to ascertain. But if someone says that they're fully proficient in a language, that is something that we can understand, at least, and it has broad applications. So my definition of C2, which doesn't necessarily mean taking a C2 test, although I certainly should be able to if I'm motivated enough and if I feel it's justified, would be that I can speak perfectly normally, perhaps with the occasional error, since I'm not a native speaker, but perfectly normally about small talk, about big talk, politics, climate change, world events, about my personal specialty area, my field, my professional field. Since learning languages does not pay the bills, I work in finance, I study in finance. And so, for example, if I were to be given the opportunity to teach a course in Spanish about finance to university students, I would, at a C2 level, be able to do that. And that's part of what I consider fluent, is to also know the sort of specialty language, or to know my field at least in each of those 10 languages. I should also be able to pretty much understand anyone unless they have an odd dialect, or they're using certain words which are really not the kind of words that most people would understand. I should be able to read just about anything, whether it be early 19th century romantic fiction or modern day philosophical texts or whatever. I should be able to be very comfortably going through a text at a fast speed without having to look up more than the occasional very rare word. And I should also, which is sometimes overlooked by people who focus so much on reading and listening, I should also have an accent that is not poor. I don't expect to have a native level accent. For example, I've been speaking French for over 20 years, and I live in a French part of the world, and yet I still have a very noticeable Anglophone accent in French. It's simply part of who I am. It's a way that I pronounce words. That being said, there are ways to minimize that, and within reason, I should be able to speak very clearly and well in each of those languages. So if you consider all these elements and you throw them together, you get a pretty daunting task. I know people personally, and I think everyone knows someone, especially if you're in a sort of an academic setting where people come from all around the world and to work in your university. I know some people who speak 3 or 4 languages at around that level. Even then, they tend to compartmentalize their knowledge in a language. So they know, for example, English and one other language, they know their field. Let's say engineering, civil engineering. But in another language that they also speak at a high level, they wouldn't be able to express themselves by writing professional reports about their field, or they wouldn't be able to really be at ease in certain types of, I don't know, reading a journal about a certain topic. So it's very, very hard to have that huge amount of knowledge, just the sheer number of words and expressions and the ease with which you have to be able to use them in more than a couple of languages. And since knowing a language is not policed by anyone, there aren't it is in terms of doing tests, for example, in Europe for residency and so on. But since very few people are going to go out there and take a C1 or C2 level test in 9 different languages, we don't really have this as a basis of comparison. So part of my motivation in doing this, in studying this and in making these series of videos, starting with this one, is to find out what is possible. I know from the research that I've done that there are people, for example, on YouTube or at these polyglot conferences that can speak, between 10 and 20 or so languages, not at a beginner level, but at a good intermediate level, with some of those languages at an even higher level. But many of these people, once again, which is perfectly fine, there's nothing wrong with this, they get their languages up to that intermediate level where they can sort of hold a conversation, especially if they're prepared for that conversational topic and they know ahead of time, then they're comfortable using the words, but they don't have that sort of general high level of proficiency to be able to be thrown into almost any situation. In other words, their ability to use a language, once you get past their 3rd or 4th strongest language, goes down quite a bit and becomes very situational. So my question for myself is, and for the entire planet, is how many languages can you know perfectly? You go online and you look this up and you have so many different accounts of people and so many different stories of this fellow knowing 50 languages or this person knowing 22, and it becomes very hard to actually make some basis of measurement. So for my own elucidation and for the elucidation of anyone who might be following this, my goal is to sort of track the difficulties of really improving to a very high level in a very large number of languages, probably for the next decade at the very least, before I succeed. I can tell you that as of today, I have some non-zero knowledge in every single one of the 10 languages that I want to learn, including my native language. So I suppose the 9 languages that I want to learn. This amount of knowledge ranges from very high. In other words, I'm comfortable that I could pass a C1 test if you gave me a week to prepare for the specific types of questions that they would be on, in 2 or 3 of them, to, for example, the weaker end, my Chinese is still quite poor and will take a huge number of hours to improve. So I have some knowledge in some of these, enough that I could stop working on them if I desired. But my goal is not to go and start learning Polish or Swahili or Arabic, maybe when I'm 65. My goal is to keep going at these 1 languages and sort of find out what are the challenges in getting multiple new languages to that high level, and see even to what extent it's possible to do that. So I'll have new updates, probably about 1 a week, usually around the middle of the week. And once a month or so once every 4 videos or so, I'm going to have some kind of exam for myself where I try to speak about various difficult topics, not what the weather is or whether I like learning languages, sort of on the cuff without any preparation, so I can make a fool of myself. Thank you. Stick around.